The first thing my sister said was, "You don't need to make a scene." She said it softly, almost kindly, as if she were offering me a glass of water instead of asking me to swallow something sharp. We were standing in my parents' kitchen, the one with the yellow tiles my mother refused to replace because they were still good. It was late afternoon, the hour when light slants in through the window and makes everything look gentler than it is. I remember noticing a crack in the grout near the sink. I had cleaned that crack so many times over the years. It never stayed clean. I was 32 years old. I had driven 3 hours after work because my mother said it was important. She hadn't said urgent, just important. In my family, that word usually meant decisions had already been made. My father sat at the table with his hands folded, not looking at me. My mother stood by the stove, pretending to stir a pot that wasn't on. My sister Claire leaned against the counter like she owned the room. In some ways, she always had. "We've been talking," my mother said finally, "about the house, about the future." I nodded once. I had learned early that nodding bought time. My father cleared his throat. "You're doing well," he said. "You don't need help." That sentence should have sounded like praise. Instead, it landed like a door closing. Claire smiled quick and tight. "I do, with the kids, with everything." There it was, the small event that didn't sound small, the beginning of the shift. I waited for someone to mention the document folder sitting on the table between us. Thick, labeled. My name wasn't on it. "We've decided," my mother said, "to transfer the house earlier than planned. It makes sense to keep it in the family." I looked at her. "I am in the family." She flinched, then recovered. "Of course, but you're independent. You've always been strong." Strong. Another word that sounded generous and functioned as removal. My father slid the folder toward Claire. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew what was inside. "It's just paperwork," she said to me. "Nothing changes between us." I felt something tighten behind my ribs, not anger, recognition. I had contributed to that house for years. Money, time, repairs. I had moved back after my divorce to help my parents when my father's health declined. I had paid utilities, covered medical bills without keeping track. I had done it quietly because that was how love worked in my mind. You showed up. You didn't tally. Apparently someone else had been tallying. "What about the will?" I asked. My mother avoided my eyes. "This is simpler." Simpler for whom was a question no one answered. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't remind them of anything I had done. I just stood there absorbing the shape of the room as it rearranged itself around me. "Is there a reason I wasn't included in the discussion?" I asked. Claire shrugged. "You're always busy. We didn't want to bother you." That was the lie that sealed it. The one that reframed exclusion as courtesy. I nodded again, then I picked up my bag. "I'm going to head back," I said. My mother looked relieved. My father said nothing. Claire reached out, touched my arm briefly like punctuation. "Don't be dramatic," she said. I wasn't, I was precise. The drive home felt longer than 3 hours. I didn't turn on the radio. I replayed the scene in my head, not emotionally but structurally. Who spoke? Who stayed silent? Who never once asked what I wanted? That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was upset, but because something had shifted out of alignment. A truth I had avoided for years had finally presented itself cleanly. In my family, love had always come with conditions. They were just subtle enough to pass as care. I opened my laptop and pulled up my bank records, my transfers, my payments. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt methodical. Then I searched for a lawyer. Not because I wanted revenge, not yet. Because I wanted clarity. I didn't know then how far this would go. I only knew one thing with certainty as the night thinned into morning. I had just been removed from a future I helped build, and I wasn't going to pretend it was accidental. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner. I noticed both immediately, the way you do when you're trying to stay present instead of spiraling. Her name was Naomi Feldman. She was younger than I expected, calm without being distant, and she didn't interrupt when I explained why I was there. I didn't start with the house. I started with the pattern. I told her about moving back after my divorce, about my father's health scares, about the way my mother had begun relying on me for things she framed as temporary, but never reclaimed. I told her about Claire's comments over the years. Small ones. "You don't really need this. You're better at handling things. You don't have kids yet, you can be flexible." Naomi listened, pen moving steadily. "And the transfer," she said when I finished. "Was it presented as a gift or an estate decision?" Estate, I replied, but without discussion. She nodded. That matters. She asked about contributions. I pulled out the folder I'd started the night before. Bank statements, checks, receipts, not everything, just enough to show consistency. You've been funding maintenance, she said. Utilities, medical. Yes. And they're transferring the primary asset to your sister. Yes. She leaned back slightly. You weren't just excluded, you were displaced. That word settled into me. Displaced, not overlooked, not forgotten, moved aside. What can I do, I asked. That depends on what you want. I thought about that. I hadn't yet separated desire from habit. I want to stop being treated like a resource, I said slowly. I want decisions that affect me to include me. Naomi nodded. Then the first step is documentation and distance. Distance. The word felt heavy and necessary. When I got home, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. We didn't mean to upset you. You know how things are right now. I stared at the screen. No question, no invitation, just a narrative already set. I didn't reply. That silence was new for me. Uncomfortable. Like standing still on a moving walkway. But I held it. Over the next few weeks, the messages continued. From my mother, from Claire, always framed as reassurance. Nothing is changing. You're reading too much into this. We did this for the kids. Never. How do you feel? Never did we hurt you. I continued documenting. Not obsessively, carefully. Naomi advised me to keep a timeline. Not emotional commentary, just facts. When I stopped paying utilities, no one mentioned it. When I stopped covering medical copays, my father called once confused. I thought you handled that, he said. I did, I replied. I'm not anymore. He was quiet for a moment. Why? Because no one asked me to, I said. That was true, and it was enough. The first crack appeared a month later. Claire called me, her voice tight. Mom says the electric bill didn't go through. I didn't pay it. What do you mean you didn't pay it? I mean I stopped. She exhaled sharply. You can't just stop. I can, I said, and I did. You're punishing them. No, I replied. I'm opting out. Silence. Then this isn't like you. That was the most honest thing she'd said. It wasn't like me. The version of me they relied on was cooperative, anticipatory, endlessly available. That version was expensive. They had never paid the cost. I had. At work, I noticed changes too. I had always taken on extra projects, covered for others, stayed late. The same impulse that had governed my family life had followed me here. When I declined a request for the first time, my manager looked surprised. Everything okay? Yes, I said, I'm reprioritizing. She nodded slowly. Nothing broke. The world didn't end. At home, I began sorting through my belongings. Not to move. To see what I owned without shared narratives attached. What was mine because I chose it, not because I absorbed it. One evening, Naomi called. They've completed the transfer, she said. Recorded. I closed my eyes. Without me. Yes. What does that mean? It means the house is no longer part of the estate as it existed before. So I'm out. She paused. Not entirely. She explained. About unjust enrichment. About implied agreements. About how contribution creates standing even without formal contracts. It's not simple, she said. And it won't be fast. I thought about the kitchen, the yellow tiles, the folder with my name missing. I'm not in a hurry, I said. That night I dreamed of standing in a hallway with doors closing one by one. I wasn't locked out. I was being redirected. In the morning I woke with a clarity that felt unfamiliar and steady. They had made a move without me. Now I would respond not emotionally but structurally. And they would finally have to acknowledge that my absence changed things. Distance changes perspective faster than confrontation ever could. Once I stopped filling the gaps became visible. The first family dinner I didn't attend happened in early spring. My mother called the night before, her voice overly casual. Claire's bringing the kids. We thought it would be nice if everyone was together. I waited. She didn't ask if I was coming. I won't make it, I said. There was a pause, brief but sharp. Are you upset? I'm unavailable. That was all. I didn't elaborate. I didn't justify. I didn't soften it with apologies. When we hung up, my hands were steady. That surprised me. The next morning, Claire texted, "You really hurt Mom last night." She cried. I read it twice, then set the phone down. Crying had always been the family's emergency signal. It summoned caretakers. It reassigned blame. It erased the original cause. I didn't respond. At work, things continued to shift. Once I stopped compensating, the imbalance showed. Deadlines slipped, Tasks piled up, people noticed. My manager called me into her office. "You've been quieter lately." "I've been focused," I said. She studied me. "On what?" "On what's actually mine to carry." She nodded slowly. "Fair, fair." Another word that felt new in my mouth. Naomi advised patience. "Let the effects surface," she said. "Don't rush to explain yourself." I took her advice seriously. I didn't announce my boundaries, I enforced them quietly. Weeks passed. The house transfer began to create friction. Utilities lapsed. Repairs went undone. Claire assumed my role without my systems. She wasn't prepared. She called one afternoon, frustration barely contained. "The plumber wants payment up front. Did you ever deal with this?" "Yes," I said. "Well, what do I do?" "You decide," I replied. "That's not helpful." "I know." She hung up. That night my father called. His voice was tired. "Your sister's overwhelmed." "I was too," I said. He sighed. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I did," I replied. "I just didn't raise my voice." He didn't answer that. The legal process moved quietly in the background. Naomi filed a notice of claim. Not aggressive, precise. It didn't demand the house back. It demanded acknowledgement, compensation, accounting. The response from my parents' attorney was swift and defensive. They framed my claim as misunderstanding, family confusion, emotional reaction. Naomi smiled when she read it. "They're minimizing." What does that mean? It means they're worried. At home, I continued sorting my life into what was chosen and what was inherited. I noticed how often I had accepted inconvenience as virtue, how often I had equated endurance with loyalty. One evening, going through old emails, I found a message from years earlier. My mother thanking me for covering a medical bill. "We'll make it right someday," she'd written. I forwarded it to Naomi. "That helps," she said. Spring turned warmer. The distance between me and my family grew more defined. Not hostile, clear. At a birthday gathering for a mutual relative, I saw them again. Neutral ground, public setting. My mother hugged me too tightly. Claire avoided my eyes. We made small talk. Weather, traffic, nothing real. At one point, Claire leaned in. "You could still come by more often," she said. "The kids miss you." I looked at her. "Do you miss me?" She blinked. "Of course." "Then call me," I said, without needing something. She didn't respond. That was when I understood something important. My absence wasn't the punishment. Their discomfort was. Later that week, Naomi called with an update. "They're willing to discuss settlement." I closed my eyes briefly. Already. "Yes, they didn't expect you to hold." "I'm not holding," I said. "I'm standing." We scheduled mediation. The night before, I felt a familiar tension. Not fear. Anticipation. The sense that a long-avoided conversation was about to become unavoidable. I didn't rehearse arguments. I reviewed facts. When I arrived at the mediator's office, Claire was already there, arms crossed. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. My father stared at the table. The mediator explained the process: neutral, structured, safe. Then Naomi spoke. She outlined my contributions, my payments, my role. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She presented a ledger. Silence followed. My mother spoke first. "We didn't realize it looked like that." Naomi responded calmly. "Intent and impact are not the same." Claire shook her head. She could have said something. I looked at her. "I did. You just heard something else." The mediator intervened gently, redirected, clarified. After 2 hours, they offered a settlement. Not generous, not insulting, a start. Naomi glanced at me. I shook my head slightly. "I'm not here to be appeased," I said. "I'm here to be accounted for." The room stilled. That was the moment. Not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. For the first time, they were forced to see me not as support, not as background, not as the one who would always adjust, but as someone whose absence had weight, and they were just beginning to understand the cost of ignoring it. The mediation ended without resolution, which didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how calm I felt walking out of the building. I had expected a release, some emotional shift, but instead there was only steadiness, as if something that had been pressing on my chest for years had finally lifted enough for me to breathe normally. My mother hugged herself in the parking lot, a posture I remembered from childhood whenever things didn't go her way. Claire avoided me entirely. My father lingered as if he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. They left together, united by habit more than agreement. Naomi walked beside me to my car. "They're not ready," she said. "But they heard you." "I'm not trying to convince them," I replied. "I just want them to stop pretending." She nodded. That's usually harder. In the weeks that followed, the pressure shifted, subtle at first. My mother stopped calling. Claire sent short clipped texts instead of long emotional ones. The family group chat went quiet. I wasn't removed. I was simply no longer addressed. It felt familiar. This was how withdrawal had always worked in my family. Silence as consequence, distance as correction. This time I didn't rush to fix it. At work, something unexpected happened. I was offered a promotion. My manager called me in late one afternoon, closed the door, and said, "We've noticed a change in how you're operating." I waited. "You're clearer," she continued. "More decisive. You don't absorb chaos anymore." I almost smiled. The role came with more responsibility, more pay, and something else I hadn't anticipated. Authority, not symbolic, actual decision-making power. I accepted. That night, I sat alone in my apartment thinking about the timing. How often women are promoted only after they stop being endlessly available. How competence becomes visible once it's no longer disguised as helpfulness. The legal process continued quietly. Naomi filed for formal discovery, financial records, property valuations, payment histories. My parents' lawyer pushed back again, citing family dynamics, emotional context. Naomi dismantled that framing piece by piece. "Family does not exempt financial accountability," she said during one call. "It complicates it." Meanwhile, cracks appeared at home. Claire called me late one night, her voice brittle. "Mom's having trouble managing things. The house is more work than we thought." I leaned against the counter phone, tucked between shoulder and ear. It always was. "You could help," she said, "just temporarily." I closed my eyes. "No." Silence. "You're being stubborn," she said finally. "No," I replied. "I'm being consistent." She hung up without saying goodbye. That was the night I fully understood that my usefulness had been mistaken for obligation, and that removing it felt like betrayal to those who had built their comfort on it. A week later, my father called. His voice was softer than usual. "Your mother's worried," he said. "She thinks you're cutting us off." "I'm not," I said. "I'm just not filling in for decisions I didn't make." "She didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I replied. "But she didn't mean to protect me either." He sighed. "Families make mistakes." "Yes," I said. "And adults take responsibility for them." That conversation didn't fix anything, but it changed something. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He listened. That was new. The first real turning point came in early summer. Naomi called me mid-morning. We received their counterproposal, and they're offering partial compensation, structured over time. I pictured my mother framing it as generosity, my sister as compromise. "Is it fair?" I asked. "It acknowledges your contributions," Naomi said carefully, "but it avoids accountability for the decision itself." I thought about the kitchen, the folder, the way no one had asked me what I wanted. "No," I said, "we continue." That afternoon I received an email from my mother. Not a text, an email, formal, deliberate. She wrote about family unity, about stress, about how hard this had been on everyone. She asked if we could put lawyers aside and talk. I forwarded it to Naomi. "Classic," she said. "They want emotional resolution without structural change." "Then we don't," I replied. At work, my new role required me to manage a team that had once leaned on me quietly. Now they had to report to me openly. It was uncomfortable for some, liberating for others. I didn't lead by force, I led by clarity. Expectations, boundaries. It worked! One evening, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. "We need to talk, not about money." I stared at it for a long moment. I didn't reply that night. Not because I was angry, but because I had learned that timing mattered. Conversations held too early tend to repeat old scripts. I slept deeply without dreams. In the morning, I responded, "I'm willing to talk," with a mediator present. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Fine. That was when I knew we were close to something irreversible. Not reconciliation, rebalancing. They had taken my silence for compliance. Now they were learning the difference. The second mediation took place in a smaller room. No long table, just chairs arranged in a circle, like the setting itself was trying to encourage honesty. I didn't mistake that for safety. Circles can still corner you if you're not paying attention. Claire arrived first. She looked tired but not humbled. My mother followed, clutching her purse as if it were armor. My father came last, moving more slowly than before. Time had been working on him, even if nothing else had. The mediator introduced herself and explained the ground rules. Respect, one speaker at a time. Focus on resolution, not blame. I listened, I always did. My mother spoke first. I never meant for this to become legal, she said, voice wavering. We raised you better than that. There it was, the inversion. Hurt reframed as misconduct. I didn't respond. Claire jumped in. This is tearing the family apart over a house. I looked at her then. Really looked. It was never just the house, I said. It was the decision. She scoffed. We had to think about the kids. You thought about control, I replied calmly, and assumed I wouldn't object. The mediator held up a hand gently. Let's slow down. Naomi spoke next. She outlined the legal position again. Contributions, reliance, reasonable expectation. She didn't mention feelings. She didn't need to. My father finally spoke. We didn't know how much you were carrying. That's because you never asked, I said. The room went quiet. For the first time, my mother looked directly at me. Not through Claire, not through obligation. At me. You always handled things, she said. We thought you were fine. I nodded. That's the problem. We talked for 2 hours. Not arguing, clarifying. Every time the conversation drifted toward guilt or sacrifice, Naomi steered it back to facts. Every time my sister tried to minimize, the mediator slowed her down. By the end, the offer changed. They agreed to full accounting, retroactive compensation for contributions, a formal acknowledgement of my stake not in ownership of the house but in value extracted from it. It wasn't everything, it was accurate. Naomi looked at me. This is solid, she said quietly. I considered it, not emotionally, structurally. I'll accept, I said, with one condition. They all looked at me. That future decisions involving shared assets or care responsibilities include me by default, I continued. Not as an afterthought. Claire opened her mouth to protest. My father raised a hand. That's fair, he said. My mother hesitated, then nodded. We signed. Not dramatically, no tears, no apologies, just signatures. When it was over, Claire stood up abruptly. I hope you're happy, she said. I'm at peace, I replied. She didn't understand the difference. She might never. Outside, Naomi exhaled. You did well. I did what I needed to. She smiled. That's usually how it goes. The money arrived weeks later. Not life-changing, not symbolic. Correct. I paid off lingering debts, invested the rest. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. At work, my role continued to expand. With authority came visibility. With visibility came opportunity. I was invited into rooms where decisions were made early, not after they were finalized. I spoke less, said more. The family dynamic shifted again. Not warmer, clearer. My mother stopped asking for help she didn't want to acknowledge. My father called occasionally just to talk. Claire kept her distance. It wasn't reconciliation, it was recalibration. One evening, months later, I drove past the old house. The lights were on. The lawn needed trimming. The porch rail still leaned slightly, a repair I had once planned and never completed. I felt nothing. Not sadness, not triumph, just neutrality. That house had been a symbol of belonging, of effort, of expectation. Now it was just a building I no longer subsidized with my silence. I realized then that revenge hadn't come in the form of loss for them. It had come in the form of removal. They no longer had access to my labor without consent, my presence without respect, my resources without recognition. That was the shift they hadn't anticipated. And once it happened, there was no going back to the old arrangement, because I had learned something irreversible. You don't have to burn bridges to stop being used. You just have to stop standing in the middle of them. The strangest part of reclaiming ground is how ordinary life becomes once the constant negotiation ends. There was no dramatic aftermath to the settlement, no sudden warmth, no final argument. Just a subtle shift like furniture moved an inch to the left. Enough to change how you walked through the room. I noticed it first in my body. I slept through the night. My shoulders stopped tightening when my phone rang. I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head before making a call. The absence of tension felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious, as if I were forgetting something important. At work, the promotion settled into routine. My team adjusted quickly once they understood I wasn't interested in micromanagement or emotional labor disguised as leadership. I set clear expectations, followed through, and stepped back. Problems surfaced faster. Solutions followed. One afternoon, a colleague pulled me aside. You're different, she said. You don't absorb everyone's stress anymore. I never should have, I replied. She laughed softly. I didn't know that was an option. Neither had I once. At home, I made a decision I had postponed for years. I sold my car and bought a smaller one, not because I needed to, but because it reflected how my life had narrowed in a good way. Fewer obligations, fewer assumptions, less maintenance of things that existed to support other people's expectations. Claire noticed before anyone else. She called unexpectedly, her tone neutral but guarded. "You seem distant." "I am," I said, intentionally. "That doesn't hurt you at all." "It does," I replied. "Just not enough to keep pretending." She was quiet. "Then Mom says you've changed." I considered that. "I stopped compensating," I said. "It looks like change from the outside." "That's not how family works." "No," I agreed. "It's how control works." She ended the call shortly after. Not angry, unsettled. A few weeks later, my father had a minor health scare. Nothing serious, enough to trigger old patterns. My mother called me first this time, her voice tight. "We're at the hospital," she said. "Can you come?" I paused. In the past, I would have dropped everything without question. This time I asked one. "Have you told Claire?" "Yes." "Is there anything specific you need me to do?" She hesitated. "No, I just thought." I waited. "I just thought you'd want to be here." "I will," I said, "tomorrow." There was a sharp inhale on the other end, then acceptance. Not gracious, real. When I arrived the next day, Claire was already there. The room was calm. My father smiled when he saw me. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I wanted to," I replied, and that was the truth. Wanting feels different than being summoned. Later in the hallway, my mother spoke quietly. "Thank you for coming." "You didn't thank me before," I said gently. She nodded. "I know." It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than we'd ever been. The legal chapter closed formally that month. Naomi sent me the final documentation. Everything settled. Nothing pending. "Are you satisfied?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and meant it. She paused. "Most people aren't." "I didn't come for validation," I replied. "I came for alignment." Outside of work and family, something else began to surface. Curiosity. Without the constant drain of proving my worth, I found myself paying attention to things I'd ignored. Ideas, interests, long dormant ambitions that had felt impractical when my energy was already spoken for. I enrolled in a short executive course, not because it advanced my career, but because it challenged how I thought. I traveled alone for a weekend, something I'd never done without justification before. I learned that I liked my own company when I wasn't managing anyone else's comfort. One evening after a long day, I sat on my couch and realized I hadn't thought about the house in weeks. The realization surprised me more than the loss ever had. That's when it hit me. The power of what I'd done wasn't in what I gained. It was in what I no longer carried. I wasn't managing my parents' anxiety. I wasn't smoothing over my sister's frustration. I wasn't absorbing guilt to maintain peace. Peace, I was learning, doesn't need maintenance when it's real. The next time Claire called, her tone was different, less sharp, more cautious. "We're thinking of refinancing," she said. "Mom wanted to know if you had any advice." I considered it. Not the question, the context. "I'm not involved in those decisions," I said. "You'll need to handle it." She sounded surprised, then resigned. "Okay." After we hung up, I didn't feel relief or irritation, just clarity. I had crossed a line they couldn't pull me back over. And in doing so, I had discovered something unexpectedly solid. When you stop living as the contingency plan, you finally get to live as the plan. That realization didn't explode, it settled. And it prepared me for what was coming next. The invitation arrived in my inbox on a Thursday morning, buried between routine updates and meeting reminders. At first glance, it looked harmless. A family meeting. My mother's words. Just to talk things through. No lawyers, no paperwork. Just us. I didn't respond right away. I had learned that urgency was often a strategy. When people ask for immediacy, they're usually trying to catch you before you're steady. I forwarded the message to Naomi. Her reply came an hour later. "If it's informal, decline. If it's substantive, formalize. Ambiguity benefits whoever already has leverage." That sentence clarified everything. I wrote back to my mother later that evening. "If there are decisions to discuss, I'm open to a mediated conversation. Otherwise, I'm not available." The response came quickly. "I was hoping we could talk as a family." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I typed one sentence. "We are a family. This is how I participate now." She didn't reply. A week passed, then another. The silence felt different this time, not punitive, assessing. At work, I was asked to lead a cross-department initiative. High visibility, high stakes. I accepted without hesitation. The old version of me would have weighed how it affected everyone else first. Now I weighed whether it aligned with my goals. It did. The project moved quickly. I delegated decisively. When resistance surfaced, I addressed it directly. No triangulation, no smoothing over. The results spoke for themselves. My manager pulled me aside after a review. "You've grown into this," she said. I nodded. Growth, I had learned, often looks like subtraction. At home, I noticed how my calendar had changed. Fewer obligations disguised as favors. More open space. That space felt unfamiliar at first, then essential. One evening, my father called. "I wanted to check in," he said. His voice was softer than usual. "Your mother's struggling with the changes." "I know," I said. "She feels like she's losing you." I considered that. "She's losing access," I replied. "Not me." He was quiet for a moment. "She doesn't see the difference." "I didn't either," I said gently. "For a long time." He sighed. "You always were the reasonable one." I felt the old reflex rise. The urge to accept that label, to carry it. "I'm still reasonable," I said. "I'm just not flexible in the same places." That seemed to land. A few days later, Claire reached out again. This time she asked to meet. Neutral ground, a cafe halfway between our apartments. I agreed. She arrived late, sat down without apologizing, ordered coffee she didn't drink. "You've changed the rules," she said. "No," I replied. "I stopped playing without them." She shook her head. "Everything used to work." "For you," I said calmly. She frowned. "That's not fair." "I know," I said. "Neither was what came before." She leaned back, arms crossed. "So what do you want now?" The question surprised me. Not because it was asked, but because it hadn't been before. "I want transparency," I said, "and choice. If I'm involved, it's because I've agreed to be, not because it's assumed." She studied me. "And if we don't agree?" "Then we don't," I said, "and life continues." She laughed softly without humor. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," I replied. "It's just clear." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again, quieter. "You know Mom thinks you're punishing her." "I know," I said. "Are you?" I met her eyes. "I'm protecting myself." She looked away. That conversation didn't resolve anything, but it changed the tone. She no longer spoke to me as if I were a resource. She spoke as if I were separate. That mattered. The real test came later that month. My mother had made a decision about my father's care without consulting me. A small one. A scheduling change. But familiar. Automatic. Assumptive. She told me afterward as if informing me were inclusion. I paused. "That doesn't work for me," I said. She bristled immediately. "It's already arranged." "Then you'll need to handle it," I replied. Her voice sharpened. "Why are you being difficult?" "I'm being consistent," I said. "We agreed on inclusion." "This isn't about money," she snapped. "I know," I said. "It's about respect." Silence followed, long, charged. Finally, she said, "You're making everything harder." "No," I replied. "I'm making it honest." She hung up. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. That night, I thought about how many times I had accepted inconvenience to preserve harmony. How often I had been praised for it. How rarely anyone asked what it cost me. The cost had been gradual, invisible, accumulative. Now the cost of my boundaries was visible. Discomfort, resistance, distance. I chose it anyway, because I had learned something crucial. When people are used to you being flexible, they mistake your boundaries for betrayal. But betrayal had already happened. I was just done participating in it. As I went to bed that night, my phone buzzed once more. A message from my mother. "We'll need to figure out how to do things differently." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I replied, "Yes, we will." For the first time, that felt like a beginning rather than a threat. And I knew the next chapter would require something even harder than distance. Consistency. Consistency is quieter than confrontation, but it's far more demanding. Anyone can draw a line once. Living inside it day after day is what tests whether the line is real. After my mother's message, nothing dramatic happened. There was no apology, no breakthrough conversation, just adjustment, slow, uneven, and uncomfortable. She began asking instead of telling. Not always, not gracefully, but enough that I noticed the effort. My father followed her lead, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with surprising care. Claire stayed distant, watching to see whether this version of me would last. I let her watch. At work, the cross-department initiative reached a critical stage. Budget approvals, executive review, the kind of meeting where credit is often reassigned quietly. I prepared thoroughly, not to defend myself, but to make reassignment impossible. When the presentation ended, the room was silent for a moment. Then the senior director nodded. "This changes how we operate," he said. "In a good way." I thanked him and sat down. Afterward, a colleague pulled me aside. "You don't hedge anymore," she said. "I stopped negotiating my credibility," I replied. She smiled. "I'm taking notes." Outside the office, my life continued to simplify. I stopped attending gatherings out of obligation. I stopped answering questions that weren't really questions. When someone asked, "Can you help with this?" I learned to ask back in what way and by when. Sometimes the answer meant yes, often it didn't. With my family, the consequences were more complex. One Sunday afternoon, my mother invited me over. "Just me," she said. "No Claire, no agenda." I considered declining, then I accepted. The house looked different now that it no longer represented something unresolved. Smaller, more fragile. My mother fussed in the kitchen while I sat at the table, the same one where so many decisions had been made without me. "I don't know how to do this," she said, finally setting down a mug. "I don't know how to talk to you without upsetting you." I met her eyes. "I'm not easily upset," I said. "I'm just not compliant." She winced slightly. "I didn't raise you to be this firm." "You raised me to be responsible," I replied. "This is what that looks like now." She sat across from me, hands folded. "I always thought you'd understand." "I did," I said. "That's why it worked for so long." She was quiet for a long moment. "Then I didn't realize how much I relied on you not pushing back." "That's the part that needs to change," I said. She nodded slowly. Not agreement, acceptance. When I left, there was no hug, just a quiet goodbye. It felt appropriate. Weeks passed. The rhythm held. Then unexpectedly, Claire called. "I need to ask you something," she said. Her tone was different. Careful. "Okay. The kids' school is changing tuition. It's more than we expected." I waited. "She thinks you might help," Claire continued. There it was, the old script revised but recognizable. "I'm not contributing financially," I said calmly. Claire exhaled, even a little. "No," I replied. She was silent for a moment. "So that's it? You're done?" "I'm done being assumed," I said, "not being family." "That feels like the same thing." "It isn't," I replied. "You just benefited from the overlap." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat with that for the while, not hurt, grounded. The next day my father called. "Your sister's upset." "I know," I said. "She says you've changed." "I have," I replied. "So has the arrangement." He sighed. "Families help each other." "Yes," I said, "when help is chosen, not extracted." He didn't argue. That night I wrote something down for the first time in months. Not notes, not records, just a sentence. "Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were built on access." I folded the paper and placed it in my desk. At work, the initiative launched successfully. Recognition followed, not loudly, appropriately. My role expanded again, this time with an invitation to shape policy rather than implement it. I accepted. Power. I was learning doesn't need to announce itself when it's stable. The next time I saw my family together was at a holiday gathering months later. Neutral location, restaurant, public. Conversation was polite, surface level, no tension, no warmth. And that was okay. I realized then that I no longer needed closeness to validate my choices. Distance had become neutral territory rather than exile. As I drove home that night, I felt something settle fully. The fear that had once kept me flexible was gone. In its place was something quieter and far more reliable. Self-trust. And once you have that, you stop needing permission to take up space. There is a phase after boundaries are set where nothing explodes but everything recalibrates. It's the phase people don't talk about because it lacks drama. No shouting, no ultimatums, just the slow recognition that the old rules no longer apply. That was where I found myself. By early fall, my family had adjusted to the fact that I no longer responded automatically. Invitations came with questions attached. Requests were phrased more carefully. Silence, when it appeared, no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space. I didn't mistake that for healing. Healing implies shared intention. What we had was coexistence. At work, the policy role placed me in rooms where long-term decisions were shaped. I listened carefully. Patterns repeat everywhere. The same dynamics that play out in families exist in organizations, just with different language. Favoritism becomes trust. Control becomes vision. Silence becomes alignment. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. During one executive session, a senior leader proposed consolidating authority under a single office for efficiency. The room leaned toward agreement. I waited, then spoke. That structure reduces accountability, I said. It also removes choice. The room stilled, not hostile, attentive. Efficiency without consent creates resistance, I continued. It looks stable until it isn't. The proposal was revised, power redistributed, no one argued. After the meeting, a colleague said quietly, "You notice things others don't." I smiled. I've lived them. Outside of work, something else shifted. I stopped explaining my family situation when people asked. I used to offer context justification reassurance. Now I said we're redefining things and let the silence do the rest. One evening, my mother called unexpectedly. Her voice was unsteady. "Your father's thinking about downsizing," she said. "The house is too much." I listened. This was not a request, not yet. "That makes sense," I replied. She hesitated. "Claire's worried about the timing." I waited. "She wondered if you had thoughts," my mother continued. There it was, careful, indirect, respectful in a way that would have felt unnatural a year earlier. "I do," I said, "but they're just thoughts. You don't need my approval." There was relief in her exhale. Not because I'd offered help, because I hadn't taken control. "I'll tell her," she said. When we hung up, I realized something quietly significant. They were learning to live without my management. That was the real consequence of everything I'd done. Not the money, not the mediation, the removal of an invisible role I'd played for so long no one else remembered it was optional. Weeks later, Claire asked to meet again. I hesitated, then agreed. We sat across from each other in the same cafe as before. She looked more tired this time, less defensive. "I don't know how you do it," she said after a while. "Just not stepping in." "I learned," I replied. She frowned. "From where?" "From being exhausted," I said simply. She nodded slowly. "I thought you liked being needed." "I liked being valued," I replied. "Those aren't the same." That landed harder than anything else I'd said to her. She stared into her cup. "I don't think Mom knows who she is without you handling things." "I didn't know who I was either," I said. "We're both learning." She didn't argue. At home that night, I thought about the word revenge again. How easily it's applied to stories like mine. How satisfying it sounds to imagine retribution. But nothing I'd done felt like revenge. I hadn't taken something from them. I had stopped giving it away. That distinction mattered. Late one night, I received an email from Naomi. "Just checking in," she wrote, "making sure everything still feels resolved." I wrote back one sentence. "It does." Because I didn't just change the outcome. I changed my position. She replied almost immediately. "That's the only kind that lasts." As winter approached, my calendar filled with things I chose. A short trip. A speaking engagement I accepted because it interested me, not because it flattered me. Quiet dinners. Early mornings without urgency. I thought about the woman I had been when this started. The one standing in my parents' kitchen, nodding to buy time, believing fairness would emerge if she waited long enough. Fairness rarely emerges on its own. It has to be claimed, calmly, precisely, without asking permission. The final test came unexpectedly. A family emergency, minor but chaotic. Messages flew, assumptions resurfaced. Claire texted, "Can you handle this?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, then I typed back, "I can help in these ways. Let me know what you choose." Minutes passed. "Then we'll take care of it." I set the phone down and felt something settle completely. I had not been pulled back in. The old gravity was gone. And in that quiet, unremarkable moment, I realized something profound. The story was no longer about what they did to me. It was about what I no longer allowed. And that meant the ending was already written, even if the pages kept turning. The closer the year drew to its end, the more clearly I could see how deeply I had confused peace with passivity. For most of my adult life, I believed harmony was something you preserved by absorbing friction. You smoothed the edges. You took on weight that wasn't yours. You stayed agreeable so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. Now that I wasn't doing that anymore, the quiet felt different. Not fragile, earned. At work, my influence had begun to shift from operational to structural. I was no longer just solving problems. I was shaping how problems were allowed to exist in the first place. That kind of authority is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in policies, in defaults, in who gets consulted before decisions are finalized. During one leadership retreat, a senior executive said something that stayed with me. "You don't rush to fill silence," he said. "You let it work." I nodded. Silence had once been my liability. Now it was my tool. The retreat ended with informal conversations over dinner. Someone asked about my family. I answered briefly. No explanations, no defensive framing, just facts. We're in a different phase, I said. They accepted that easily. Strangers often do. It's the people who benefited from your old version who struggle the most. At home, I began to prepare for something I hadn't consciously planned, letting go of the hope that things would eventually return to what they were. Not because what they were was good, but because familiarity has its own pull. One evening while cleaning out a drawer, I found an old set of spare keys. My parents' house, my sister's car. I had been the backup for everyone. I held the keys for a moment, then placed them in an envelope. The next time I saw my mother, I handed it to her without comment. She looked confused. "What's this?" "Your keys," I said. She frowned. "Why?" "Because I don't need them," I replied. "And you don't need me to have them." She didn't argue. She just nodded and put the envelope in her purse. That exchange did more than any conversation we'd had in years. A few weeks later, my father called again. His voice sounded older than before. "I've been thinking," he said, "about how much you did, how much we assumed." I listened. "We didn't notice until you stopped," he continued. "That's on us." I didn't rush to reassure him. I let the moment exist. "I know," I said finally. He exhaled. "I wish we'd done things differently." "So do I replied, "but we're here now." That was the closest we came to acknowledgement. It was enough. As the holidays approached, invitations came again, carefully worded, flexible, no assumptions attached. I attended one gathering, left early, no tension, no commentary. Claire pulled me aside near the end. "You really don't jump in anymore," she said. "No," I replied. She hesitated. "Does it ever feel lonely?" I considered the question honestly. "Sometimes," I said, "but it feels worse to disappear inside a role you didn't choose." She nodded, eyes down. "I don't know how you stopped." "I didn't," I said. "I replaced it." "With what?" "With self-respect." She didn't answer. That night, driving home, I realized something important. The turning point of this entire story hadn't been the legal action or the mediation or the money. It had been the moment I stopped negotiating my right to exist without utility. Everything else followed naturally from that. In December, I was asked to speak at a small internal event. Not about leadership, about transitions, about what happens when systems change and people resist. I told my story without details. No family, no house, just the shape of it. When you remove an invisible support, I said the structure either collapses or recalibrates. Neither outcome is your responsibility to prevent. The room was quiet when I finished. Then someone clapped. Then another. Afterward, a woman approached me. "I think I've been the support," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "Then you get to decide how long that continues." As the year closed, I spent an evening alone, not out of avoidance, but intention. I cooked, I read, I reflected. I thought about how this had started. A small decision made without me. A conversation framed as inevitable. A role removed without acknowledgement. It could have ended with resentment, with distance that hardened into bitterness. Instead, it ended with something far more durable. Choice. I had learned how to withdraw without vanishing, how to step back without collapsing, how to let others experience the consequences of their assumptions without needing to punish them. Revenge had never been the point. Reclamation had. And with that understanding, I knew the final chapter wouldn't be about what I took from anyone else. It would be about what I kept for myself. The beginning of the new year arrived without urgency, no dramatic reset, no declarations, just a quiet sense that something fundamental had settled into place. I noticed it in small moments. The way I no longer checked my phone after family calls, replaying what I should have said differently. The way decisions at work no longer felt like tests of my worth, only choices with consequences. The way silence stopped feeling like something I needed to fix. That was new. In January, I was invited to join an advisory committee outside my company. Independent, temporary. The kind of role that required judgment more than availability. I accepted without overthinking it. At the first meeting, someone asked me why I'd been recommended. "She's good in situations where everyone wants her to smooth things over," another member said. "But she doesn't." I smiled slightly. It was the best description of me I'd heard. Around the same time, my family entered another quiet transition. My parents moved forward with downsizing plans. Slowly, carefully. This time without consulting me until they had actual questions. Not symbolic ones, practical ones. My mother called one afternoon. "We're looking at a smaller place," she said. "We wanted to know if you'd like to see it." Not to decide, just to see. I appreciated the phrasing more than the invitation. I can do that, I said. When I visited, the place was modest, bright, manageable. My mother walked me through it, pointing out storage and light, as if she were learning how to narrate decisions aloud. It feels strange, she admitted. Not asking you first. I imagine it does, I replied. She stopped in the living room and looked at me. You seem lighter. I am, I said, because I'm not holding things that aren't mine. She nodded slowly. I didn't realize how much I gave you to hold. I didn't respond right away. Then you didn't give it, I said. You assumed it would be taken. She didn't argue. That was new too. Claire remained distant, but not hostile. We spoke occasionally, brief updates, neutral ground. I didn't push for more. Distance had taught me that closeness forced is not closeness at all. One evening, she surprised me. I've been thinking about what you said, she admitted, about being valued versus being needed. I waited. I don't think I've ever known the difference, she continued. That's not a failure, I said. It's just information. She exhaled. I wish you'd told me sooner. I did, I replied gently. You just heard it differently then. She nodded, eyes wet but steady. I hear it now. That was enough. Not reconciliation, recognition. At work, my influence continued to expand in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not upward exactly, but outward. People sought my input on transitions, restructures, conflicts that weren't quite crises yet. I didn't rush to resolve them. I asked questions, I pointed out patterns. I let people sit with their own discomfort. One colleague said, half joking, "You don't rescue anyone." I respect them too much, I replied. In February, Naomi invited me to coffee, not to discuss legal matters, just to talk. You've done something rare, she said. You didn't replace one controlling system with another. I replaced it with boundaries, I said. She smiled. That's harder. I thought about the past year, the kitchen, the folder, the drive home, the first moment I stopped paying, the first time I said no without explanation. None of it had been dramatic, all of it had been decisive. One night I dreamed of the house again. Not as it was, but empty, clean, unclaimed. I walked through it without attachment. Then I left and locked the door, not to keep anyone out, but because it was no longer mine to enter. When I woke, I felt peaceful. That was when I understood something important. Closure doesn't come from others acknowledging what they did. It comes from you no longer needing them to. As spring approached, my life felt intentional in a way it never had before. Not perfect, not conflict-free, but aligned. I knew what I would and wouldn't do, what I would and wouldn't tolerate, who I would show up for and under what conditions. The version of me who had once stood quietly in the kitchen nodding to buy time felt distant, not erased, integrated. She had done the best she could with the tools she had. I had simply added new ones. And with that, I sensed the story moving toward its end. Not because everything was resolved, but because the central question had been answered. I was no longer waiting to be included. I was choosing where I belonged. The final chapter wouldn't be loud. It would be clear. I used to believe that belonging was something other people granted you. A seat at the table, a voice in the room, a role that proved your value. It took losing all of that to understand how little of it had ever been real. The final months of that year passed quietly. No crises, no ultimatums, just days that belonged to me without explanation. I woke when I needed to. I worked with purpose, not urgency. I rested without guilt. That more than anything told me the work was done. My parents moved into their new place in early spring. Smaller, brighter, manageable. I helped on the day of the move, not because it was assumed, but because I chose to. When I left, my mother hugged me and said thank you without adding anything else. It felt complete. Claire and I settled into something resembling honesty. We weren't close. We weren't estranged. We were two adults no longer pretending we wanted the same things. Sometimes that's the healthiest version of family there is. At work, I declined a role that would have consumed my time without deepening my impact. A year ago, I would have accepted out of obligation. This time I said no and meant it. The opportunity passed. Nothing collapsed. That was the final confirmation. One evening, I sat alone with a notebook and wrote down the lessons I wanted to remember. Not for anyone else, for myself. That silence is only peaceful when it's chosen. That love without choice is not love, it's management. That being the strong one is often just another way to be overused. That boundaries don't punish others, they protect you. And that reclaiming your life rarely looks dramatic from the outside, but it changes everything on the inside. If this story sounds familiar, If you've ever been the one who handled things, smoothed things over, stayed quiet to keep the peace, know this. You're not selfish for stepping back. You're not cruel for asking to be included. And you're not obligated to keep playing a role that costs you your dignity. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop nodding, stop compensating, and let the system adjust without you. If this story resonated with you, feel free to share your thoughts or experiences. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about quiet strength, earned boundaries, and power reclaimed without shouting, stay with me. Because the most powerful revenge is not destruction, it's freedom.